This is an imperfect reading of Wild Fermentation, the flavor, nutrition, and craft of live culture foods, updated and revised edition by Sandor Elix Katz. Chapter 13, Cultural Reincarnation. Fermentation in the cycles of life, soil fertility, and social change. Fermentation is a lot bigger than its food transforming aspect. Microorganisms decompose dead animals and plant tissues into elements that can nourish plants. As the early microbiologist Jacob Lippmann eloquently stated in his 1908 Bacteria in Relation to Country Life, microorganisms are the connecting link between the world of the living and the world of the dead. They are the great scavengers entrusted with restoring to circulation the carbon, nitrogen, hydrogen, sulfur, and other elements held fast in the dead bodies of plants and animals. Without them, dead bodies would accumulate, and the kingdom of the living would be replaced by the kingdom of the dead. This image helps me to accept death and decay. It is clear evidence on the physical plane that life is a cyclical process, with death as an indispensable part. It makes the harshest reality of life more understandable, more acceptable. During the same years that I developed my fascination with fermentation, I spent a fair share of my time pondering my own decay and death. How could I not imagine it after testing HIV positive before any effective treatments were available? Nobody has said this more eloquently than the late poet Audre Lorde. Living a self-conscious life under the pressure of time, I work with the consciousness of death at my shoulder, not constantly, but enough to leave a mark upon all of my life's decisions and actions. And it doesn't matter whether this death comes next week or 30 years from now. This consciousness gives my life another breath. It helps shape the words I speak, the way I love, my prolific action, the strength of my vision and purpose, and the depth of my appreciation for living. As I wrote the first edition of this book, I turned 40. My age group peers were talking about midlife at the time and now a decade and some later. It did not seem implausible that I could be at the midpoint of my life and that I will celebrate my 80th birthday in the year 2042. I love life, and I believe in the infinity of possibility. But I am a student of observation and realism and probability, and at 40 or more years seemed extremely unlikely. Over how many decades are the medicines that saved me from the downward spiral of AIDS sustainable? They impact upon many systems of the body and may take a toll over time. Though people with AIDS are living longer, friends keep dying of it. I have had ample opportunity to get used to the idea that this is the latter period of my life. I wonder, is this resignation? Is this loss of will to survive? Revising the book at 53, I feel very open to a long life. My father is a robust 82, and I can picture 90, thanks to the inspiration of a dear non-agenarian friend, Hector Black, and time with a couple of other 90-something powerhouses who remain very engaged in the world and clearly feel that they still have much to live for. But when it comes to longevity, one absolutely never knows. Death happens. It can come peacefully at 112, or it can come abruptly when you're least expecting it, like an accident or a mass shooting. It can be an individual experience like a degenerative disease, or a shared tragedy like an epidemic, war, or genocide. You never know what's going to happen. Whatever decisions you might make in pursuit of a long, healthy life, you ultimately have limited influence in the matter. I feel there is a wisdom in making peace with death. It will come. All any of us can do is embrace life as best we can. And when we die, I know and I believe that all that we are will continue to be part of the life cycle, fermenting and nourishing and becoming a myriad of other life forms. My fermentation practice is a daily affirmation of this faith. Getting acquainted with death. Our society distances us from death. We have created impersonal institutions to handle the transition. What are we so afraid of? I feel lucky to have been present when my mother died at home. She had been unconscious for about a week at the end of a long struggle with cancer. Edema bloated her legs and slowly rose higher on her body. Her breathing grew labored as her lungs filled with fluid. Our family gathered around her in a death watch. Her breaths became shallower and spasmodic until one involuntary muscle contracted was the last. We sat with her for a while and cried, trying to grasp the enormity of the event. The men who came to our apartment for her body in the middle of the night were right out of central casting, pale and grim. They lifted my mother's bloated body into a bag on a stretcher and rolled it to the elevator. To get it into the elevator, they had to stand it up, and my mother's body fell like a lead weight. Whoa! Death was graphic and real. Since then, I've spent time with 3 other bodies post-mortem. One was Linda Kubek, a friend who died of breast cancer. In the period before she died, I was part of her caretaking team. What I remember most vividly about caretaking Linda is applying clay compresses to a baseball-sized tumor protruding from her left armpit. Cancer is such an abstract concept, so internal and hidden, and shrouded in euphemism. Yet that tumor was very concrete. When Linda died, her body was left on her bed for 24 hours before her home burial. By the time we arrived the morning after her passing, friends and family had created a shrine around her with flowers and incense and photos and fabrics. It was truly beautiful and felt like an appropriate transition between life and burial. We sat with Linda's body for a while. It was very peaceful. Afterward, we went swimming in a nearby pond, and when I came up from diving in, there was a snakeskin floating on the surface of the water. It was a powerful affirmation for me of the idea that death is part of the process of life, nothing to fear. Tennessee is one of the few states that allow home burial, and Linda's nephew spent the day digging her grave. A carpenter friend built a simple pine casket. Late in the afternoon, her assembled friends and family processed with songs and drums and chants to her gravesite and laid her to rest. It felt very good that no commercial establishments, cemetery, funeral home, crematorium, were involved. It was people taking care of their own. The next dead body I spent time with was Russell Morgan. Russell is a friend who died at the age of 28 of AIDS. Actually, Kaposi sarcoma lesions in his lungs. Russell died very shortly before effective treatments became available. And I was visiting him at the time of his death. He had been in and out of the hospital. His breathing became uncomfortably difficult, and he decided to go back to the hospital. I helped carry him down the front steps into the car, but he never returned home. I was in the corridor outside his hospital room when he died. He was with his lover and his family, and I knew he had died because I heard them wailing. Russell had been connected to oxygen, and still his breathing became more and more labored. As the scene was recounted to me, Russell removed the respirator mask. He threw it on the floor, and he said, "Fuck this," and dived bravely into the unknown beyond. I admire his courage. The hospital staff let us spend some time in the room with Russell's body. We built a shrine around Russell in the hospital bed, trying to create a ritual of transition
in that denatured environment. Most recently, I helped bury my friend Crazy Owl, one of my fermentation mentors, who made the first homemade miso I tried. He lived a good long life into his mid-80s, and as his illness became debilitating, he stopped most of his elaborate daily self-care routine and announced, "I'm ready to go." As his friends arrived for his burial, we had the opportunity to view him, touch him, and talk to him. He looked more peaceful in death than he ever did in life. I got to share the moment with a young friend who had never seen a dead body and saw how much more real this abstraction of death became for him. These experiences has given me a vision for how I would like my own death to be handled. I'll be happy to live a good long time, but I have given death plenty of thought. I'd like my body to be given to a transition period so my friends and family can be with me, to touch my clammy skin and say goodbye to my lifeless form, and to have death demystified a little bit. Then I want to be returned to the earth without resort to the impersonal industries of death. Just place me in a hole in the ground, no casket please, and let me compost fast. Compost happens. I love to watch the compost decompose. Recognizable forms with histories, such as onion skins from last night's soup, gradually melt back into all oneness of the earth. I find this process itself so beautiful, poetry. Walt Whitman found inspiration in compost too. The summer growth is innocent and disdainful above all those strata of sour dead. What chemistry! That the winds are really not infectious. That all is clean forever and forever. That the cool drink from the well tastes so good. That blackberries are so flavorous and juicy. That the fruits of the apple orchard and the orange orchard, that melons, grapes, peaches, plums, none of them poison me. That when I recline on the grass, I do not catch any disease, though probably every spear of grass rises out of what was once catching disease. Now I'm terrified at the earth It is that calm and patient. It grows such sweet things out of such corruptions. It turns harmless and stainless on its axis, and with such endless succession of diseased corpses. It distills such exquisite winds out of such infused fetor. It renews with such unwitting looks of its prodigal annual sumptuous crops. It gives such divine material to men, and accepts such leavings from them at last. Oh God. I use the term compost broadly to describe the piles of kitchen scraps, the piles of weeds and prunings, the piles of goat muck under the excrement mixed with bedding straw, and the piles of our own human feces from our outhouse mixed with toilet paper, sawdust, and ash. After a year or two, each of these piles looks the same. They're all broken down into simpler forms by microorganisms in the act of fermentation. Composting is a fermentation process. There are many different ideas about the best composting methods. Gardeners are a passionate bunch with strong opinions about the best way to do things. Rodale's complete book of composting describes gardeners who spend years running from method to method, charting secret figures, constructing weird bins, boxes, and ventilating pipes, and watering systems, and carefully measuring each bit of material which is placed just right on the heap. Certainly, you can manipulate conditions to encourage compost to proceed faster or hotter or more odor-free, but even if you do nothing and let the food scraps just accumulate, compost happens. There's nothing you can do to stop it. Microorganisms decompose organic compounds. It is this process, as it breaks down fallen leaves, animal feces and carcasses, dead trees and other plants, and any other organic matter, that regenerates the soil. The transformative action of microorganisms is the basis of soil fertility. In Chapter 2, I referred to a 19th century German chemist named Justus von Liebig, who staunchly opposed the idea that fermentation is a biological process. This same misguided man pioneered the idea of fertilizing soil with manufactured chemicals. Von Liebig's 1845 monograph, Chemistry and Its Application to Agriculture and Physiology, laid the groundwork for the chemical agriculture methods that have become standard practice and that are rapidly depleting soils everywhere. Fermentation is a natural, biological, self-generating process of decomposition that builds soil fertility and nurtures plant life. Chemical fertilization may be effective in terms of short-term yields, but it impairs the function of the soil as a self-regulating, biodiverse, ecological system. Thinking about mass food production makes me sad and angry. Chemical monocrop agriculture, genetic modification of the most basic food crops to accommodate even heavier chemical usage. Ugly, inhumane factory animal breeding. Ultra-processed foods full of preservative chemicals, industrial byproducts, and packaging. Food production is just one realm among many in which ever more concentrated corporate units extract profits from the earth and the mass of humanity. Historically, food has been our most direct and tangible ongoing connection to the earth. Increasingly, though, food has become a collection of mass-produced and aggressively marketed commodities. This is the song of progress. We've supposedly been freed by technology and mass social organization from the burdens of growing or procuring our own food. Just going to the supermarket and putting the food into the microwave is a burden enough. Most people do not know or care where their food comes from. This brings to mind one of my professors in college. He was from Cameroon and he asked, "You Americans, do you not care how your food is treated? Do you know who your farmer is? What is the state of the meat you're eating? This is very confusing to me." Social change. The astute reader will have noticed by now that my outlook can be rather bleak. Many current trends contribute to my pessimism. Not only mass food production, but war, climate change, accelerating species extinctions, the growing class divide, the persistence of racism and xenophobia, the horrifying number of people in prisons, high-tech militarization and social control, consumerism as a patriotic duty, polarized media and politics driven by greed, and so much more. What gives me hope is the simple notion that current trends do not necessarily have to continue. It seems to me that they cannot possibly. The revolutionary spirit of liberation and hope always and everywhere remains, even dormant or confined to dreams, like a seed culture, ready any time to multiply, thrive, and transform, given the right conditions. Social change is another form of fermentation. Ideas ferment as they spread and mutate and inspire movements for change. The Oxford English Dictionary offers as the second definition of ferment, the state of being excited by emotion or passion, agitation, excitement, a state of agitation tending to bring about a purer, more wholesome, or more stable condition of things.
The word ferment derives from the Latin fervere, to boil. Fervor and fervent are also words from the same root. Fermenting liquids bubble, just like boiling liquids. Excited people can channel the same intensity and use it to create change. Though fermentation is a phenomenon of transformation, the change it renders tends to be gentle, slow, and steady. Contrast fermentation with another transformative natural phenomenon, fire. As I revised this book in 2015, fire seared itself into my consciousness in two separate events. First, my friend Dust's house burnt down. It happened in the night as he was sleeping. He awoke to smoke and managed to escape, but not without severe burns. He lost everything except his life. When he recounted the story, it was with a sense of being extremely grateful. Had he slept seconds longer, he may have perished with the house. Then a few months later, another fire destroyed the home of my friends Meryl and Gabby. They're in their 70s and built the sprawling, funky house themselves decades ago for their large family. The house had enough artifacts to fill a museum, mementos of their unique and fascinating countercultural lives, all gone in an instant. Luckily, nobody was home, and so nobody was hurt, but their overwhelming reaction was gratitude for that. But loss sinks in slowly as they think of books, letters, photographs, artwork, clothes, and other cherished objects that are gone forever. Fire changes everything in an instant. In the realm of social change, fire is the revolutionary moment of upheaval, desperately sought or dreaded and guarded against, depending on your perspective. Fire spreads, destroying whatever lies in its path, and its path is unpredictable. Fermentation is not so dramatic. It bubbles rather than burns, and its transformative mode is gentle and slow, steady too. Fermentation is a force that cannot be stopped. It recycles life, renews hope, and goes on and on. Your life and my life and everyone's lives and deaths are part of the endless biological cycle of life and death and fermentation. Wild fermentation is going on everywhere, always. Embrace it. Work with the material resources and life processes that are close at hand. As microorganisms work their transformative magic and you witness the miracles of fermentation, envision yourself as an agent for change, agitating and releasing bubbles of transformation. Use your fermented goodies to nourish yourself and your family and your friends and allies. The life-affirming power of these basic foods contrasts sharply with the lifeless industrial processed foods that fill supermarket shelves. Draw inspiration from the action of bacteria and yeast and make your life a transformative process. That's pretty much the end of the book. There is an appendix with cultural resources. So that's it. Thanks for listening.